This is the day the Lord hath made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Good morning again, everybody. The phrases we looked at the last time, the times of the Gentiles and the fullness of the Gentiles. In our last presentation, we looked at these two phrases. What are they meaning? We explained the last time that the times of the Gentiles speaks to the Gentiles' dominion over the nation, while the fullness of the Gentiles speaks to a designated period God has so given to the Gentiles, where the Gentiles can now have an opportunity to be saved. After this period is over, which we are now in the dispensation of grace, this is the fullness of the Gentiles, the church age. This is the gap between Daniel 6 to 9 and 70th week, the final week. We read, while the times of the Gentile is not in Daniel, we can find this in Jesus's discourse, an Olivet discourse, in Luke chapter 21, when he talked about the destruction of Jerusalem. But when you see Jerusalem trodden by armies, then know that it's the desolation is there. Then let those who are in Judah flee to the mountains. Let those who are in the midst of her depart. And let not those who are in the country enter her. For these are the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. But woe to those who are give child in those days, who are nursing babies in those days. For there will be great distress in the land and wrath upon the people. And verse 24, and they will fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem will be trampled down, trodden down underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. And I want you to understand that this speaks to the political system. Now, these two phrases must not be confused, because Paul was very clear, as we explained constantly, that God so orchestrated it that he desired that all flesh should be saved. It's not the will of God that any should perish. Salvation was exclusively of the Jews, by the Jews, for the Jews. But God now designed an opportunity. He now gives us Gentiles an opportunity that we may now be saved. We can come in. And Paul writes to this in Romans chapter 11. He writes, you will say then, branches were broken off that I might be grafted in. Well, yes, because of unbelief they were broken off. Talking about Israel, they were broken off because of unbelief that they come in. But for if God did not spare the natural branches, he may not spare you also, talking about Gentile. Therefore, consider the goodness and severity of God and those who felt severity, but towards you, Gentile, goodness, if you continue in its goodness. Otherwise, you also be cut off. And they also, if they do not continue in unbelief, be grafted back in. For God is able to graft them back in, talking about Israel. For if you were cut off of the olive tree, which is wild by nature, and were grafted contrary to nature into a cultivated, a real olive tree, how much more will these who are natural branches be grafted back into their own vine or olive tree? Talking about the Jews. Jews will be brought back. For I do not desire, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own thinking, that blindness in part has happened to Israel. Israel as a nation is not totally blind, but partially blind. They are not seeing the Messiah for who he is. We cannot overemphasize this. And I know we have dealt this on several occasions. But this is so that Gentile will understand, people like me, without any Hebrew blood in my vein, that God has now given us an opportunity to be grafted into the unnatural branch, into wild by nature, graft into the true vine. If the Jewish nation, we pointed out, did not neglect the ordinances of God, we'd never have to be talking about a time of the Gentile. God has his own plan, and God sets boundaries. He separates people. God is sovereign, he's in control. Because they rebelled against God and did not embrace his ordinances, God now set boundaries. And Israel is now subjugated to the rest of the nations. You read in Deuteronomy 32:8, when the Most High divided their inheritance to the nation, when he appeared, the son of Adam, he set boundaries. God sets boundaries. You can't cross it. In the book of Job, we read, Satan couldn't get to him because he says to God, isn't there an edge around Job? I want to get to him, but I can't get to him. God protects his people, and for whatever reason, he establishes boundary that people can cross. So Israel will not have an opportunity to get back in dominion until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Now, we also pointed out that the times of the Gentile began when transfer or earthly rule was transferred from Israel to the Gentiles. And they will continue to dominate Israel and dominate the nation until Israel is once again brought back into harmony with God. It was in chapter 2:1 of Daniel. The Nebuchadnezzar dream covers the entire period of Gentile dominion from 606 BC to where we are in 2020, or however long this period may continue. This covers the rule, the Gentile political system, what he saw with the image of the set up on the plain of Dura. This was God showing Daniel the political system of man, the time of man, Gentile rule, Gentile dominion, and covers the entire period until the Messianic kingdom is set up. When the stone is cut out of the mountain without hands and smash the image and break it in pieces. Now, Daniel spoke to Nebuchadnezzar concerning his dream. Nebuchadnezzar's dream was the revelation of the political system of man, or the time of man, also referred to in Luke, which we just read, the time of man. This is where we are in control. Nebuchadnezzar ascended to the throne. We read in Daniel chapter 1. In the third year of the reign of Judah, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim of Judah into his hands. It is God who sets up leaders and rulers. God is sovereign. He is in control. He rules. He knows what he's doing. Yes, it's political season all over the world. People are vying for offices and position and who should lead the nation. But I'm here to tell you that God is the one who sets rulers up. He's the one who rules. He's the one who is in control. He's the one who gives it to whomsoever he will. God is sovereign. We read in Romans chapter 9, so then it is not of him who will, nor of him who runs or compete politically, but God who shows mercy. Romans 9 and 17, for the Scripture says, so Pharaoh, for this reason, for this purpose, I have raised you up, that I might show my power in you, and that my name may be declared in all the earth. I don't know what God is doing with regards to the political leaders that we have in our time and in all of these nations of the world. They brag and believe that it's because of them and their own might and their own power what that gets them to where they are. But I've got news for you. God rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whomsoever he will. It is God's doing. He knows what he's doing. He has his purpose. He said to Saul, it's hard for thee to kick against a prick. You can't fight against God. Saul recognizes that what he thought he was doing in regards to service for God, persecuting the church and the Christian, that he was doing God's service until God met him. Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? I am in control. I'm in charge. You can't kick against the prick. And we read in Daniel chapter 2, 5 and verse 20, but when his head, his heart was lifted up and his mind hardened in pride, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. You got to be careful how we brag and watch the arrogance and pride, because God controls. He has the power to set up, and he has the power to bring down and to pull down and to destroy. And he was driven from the sons of men, and his heart was made like the beasts. God can just touch you, and you're as mad as can be. Nebuchadnezzar was driven from men. His glory was taken from men and his dwelling, and he went with the wild beasts. They fed him with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High, God Almighty, Jehovah God, ruled in the kingdom of men, and that he appointed it over it whomsoever he pleases. We must give God glory. It is not by power, it is not by might, but it's by my spirit, said God. God is in control. He rules. He runs things. The political system of the world ignore God. Some country takes God, they took God out of the school, trying to use God as a prop, using the Bible as prop, without no sincerity of heart. But God, the Bible says, for God is spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. God is sovereign. He has a purpose for all of us. We must consider ourselves that we're human and give God glory. Let us look at Nebuchadnezzar's dream a little bit. And we're going to try to see if we can cover some of these images and these times, these political rulers, a little bit today. Now, in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, he had a dream, and he was troubled in his sleep. Then the king gave the commandment to all his magicians, astrologers, the soothsayers, the Chaldeans, to tell him his dream. So they came and stood before the king, and they couldn't tell the king. The king had a hard choice. Not only that they should interpret the dream, but they should tell him what he dreamt. Then the Chaldean spoke to the king. O king, live forever. Tell your servant the dream, and we will give you the interpretation. The king answered and said, you tell me. He answered back, O king, for the God of heaven give thee a kingdom powerful and strong, and glory and power is given unto you. Whatsoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field, fowls of heavens, given into in thine hand, and has made thee ruler over it. And he says to Nebuchadnezzar, he set him up He said, King, I want you to understand that you are this head of gold. And watch the progression. The image started with the head of gold, goes down in silver and brass, then into iron mixed with clay until the stone is hewn out of the mountain. Let's look at them as a little bit more in detail. The first, head of gold of the image, the Babylonian Empire. The image symbolizes the four great world empires, and that would succeed each other historically. There are to be four and only four great world empires on the earth, from the ascension of Nebuchadnezzar to the throne of Babylon to the second coming of Christ. They are here represented by four metals of the image: the gold, the silver, the brass, and the iron and the clay. And gods had made known, they're made known by names and their succession. The first empire is pointed out by Daniel, and as he interprets, to be the Babylonian Empire in his word. Nebuchadnezzar, thou art the head of gold. And it started with him. And after reigning, and remember now, all of this can be found in the secular history. After reigning for about 44 years, he died in BC 516. He was succeeded by his sons and relatives. We see why Nebuchadnezzar was called the head of gold, because all his successors were inferior to him. And after Belshazzar's death by the in Babylon, the Babylonian Empire ceases to exist. It was captured by Medo-Persian. It went into the other, the breast and the arm of silver, the second empire. The Medo-Persian is pointed out by Daniel in the account of the fall of Babylon. And we read that night was Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, slain by Darius, the king of Media and Persia. And they took the kingdom. Daniel 5:30 to 31. It is also referred to the vision of the ram and the e-goat. Remember, I told you, in order to understand more of Revelation, more about Revelation, we need to be familiar with Daniel. We read in Daniel chapter 8, verse 18. Now, as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep on my face towards the ground. But he touched me and set me on my face, set me up upright. And he said, Behold, I will make thee known what shall be the last end of the indignation. For the time appointed, the end shall be. Verse 20. The ram which thou sawest having two horns, or the king of Media and Persia. And I'm reading from Daniel in chapter 8:20. It's not just a concoction of our imagination and theological interpretation. This can be found in secular history. Verse 20, the ram which thou sawest having two horns are the kings of Media and Persia. And the rough goat, the he-goat, is the king of Greece. The horn between his eyes is the first king. Presumption here that Alexandria. This corresponds with the two arms of the image. They're called the king of Media and Persia. This was a dual empire represented by the two arms of the image and the two horns of the goat. The left arm of the image represents Media, the weaker of the empire, and the right arm, Persia, the stronger of the kingdom. The fact that Medo-Persian Empire is represented by the silver of the image indicates that silver is inferior to gold, that the Medo-Persian Empire was inferior to the Babylonian Empire. And now we go on to the third, the Grecian Empire. In BC 330, Alexander the Grecian conquered Persia. You can read this up in secular history. The Persian Empire. The third empire is a Grecian, which is identified here in Daniel, which we just read in chapter 8. And the rough goat is the king of Greece. And the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king, Alexandria. The king of Greece and the great eagle, the horn between his eyes, the first king. Daniel 8, verse 20 through 21. Again, we see inferiority. Brass is inferior metal to silver, and silver is an inferior metal to gold. Notice carefully, over the years, the kingdoms and the empires are deteriorating to where we are. Started with gold, dictatorship, autocracy, that those who are in charge, who he will, he slew, and he could kill who he want. But now we're down to democracy, and we give all this up talk about democracy. But let me tell you, democracy, as with all we talk about democracy, how strong is democracy? Where the people have a right. It is democracy that kills Jesus. Whom should we release? And the crowd cried out, give us Barabbas and crucify Jesus. Pilate had the authority, he could have released Jesus. But so the scripture would be fulfilled. The Grecian Empire was a worldwide empire with Alexander at its head. After 8 short years, he died of marsh fever in BC 323. His empire was divided among his 4 generals. And this, you can read this. We haven't got the time to go in all of the details in this regard, but it's all there. Now, the 4th empire, very critical. This is where we are. The 4th empire, the Roman Empire. This is not named in the book of Daniel, but the inferences are there. If we started with Nebuchadnezzar and it ran down from 606 to here we are, where Alexander died, the Grecian Empire in BC 223, 323. This is where we are. We're going down this image, this great image. The 4th empire, even though it's not in the book of Daniel, what it points out in Daniel's vision of the 70th week. Daniel chapter 9, verse 26. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not to himself. And the people of the prince shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end year shall be with a flood. And unto the end of the war, desolations are determined. Verse 27. And he shall confirm the covenant, talking about the Antichrist, with many for 1 week. And in the middle of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and the overspreading of abomination, which make desolate, even unto the consummation, and that determined shall be poured out upon the desolate. I want you to understand here that the image that Nebuchadnezzar saw, the longest period in terms of time, and if you look at the image, the feet from where it stopped with Alexandria, and it down to his 4 generals to where we are, in terms of the period of history, the time, it's the longest period, runs, and they bleed into each other. But the last emperor, let me add quickly here before we go, that will rule the Roman Empire is the Antichrist. And Jerusalem and the temple were to be destroyed by a people, the Romans, from whom later should come a prince, which we study and have seen, the Antichrist. Now we know that Jerusalem and the temple were destroyed by Rome in AD 70, and that the Antichrist that will be the last emperor of the revived, and I noticed revived Roman Empire, revived in terms of the structure and the leader and the chain of command. And as Antichrist, the little horn of the four wild beasts that correspond to the iron of the image, then the fourth empire is Rome. The fourth empire, represented by the legs, is more than half the length of the image and will run for a much longer period than the previous empires. It is also divided into two, both legs. Rome was divided, Eastern Division with Constantinople as the capital, and it's a Western Division with Rome as its capital in AD 364. And we can find this in secular history. The 2 feet of the image are further divided into 10 toes, which some believe in this time are you're being batted around the Federated Kingdom, the 10 toes kingdom, which is where we are, the EEC, the European Common Market, which is where we are, If you try to find yourself on the chart of the image, we're somewhere down in the feet, mixed with iron and clay, down in the 10 toes kingdom, the Federation Kingdom, where the nations, and it's an attempt globally where they're trying to bring the nations together, because the stage has been set for the man of sin to be revealed. And we talked about earlier, once the Antichrist is revealed, the church is gone. Church will not go through the great tribulation. The church will not be there in the middle of the week. The church is gone at the end of chapter 3 in Revelation. It's gone in the first verse 4. We're translated up into glory. If the image represents the political system of man and the domination of the Gentile, then it speaks to where we are and will continue through to the revived Roman Empire with the last emperor, the Antichrist, to be manifested. Still future. What is clear? That the metal gets weaker and weaker. And I want you to understand, we're at the weakest point of leadership with regards to what man has to offer politically. I don't matter who they set up. I don't matter what they call themselves. It's the weakest point of the political system of man, the rule of man, whoever he is or whoever they may be. The conglomeration of the EEC and the 10 toes coming together. This is the weakest point because iron mixed with clay, impossible. Iron cannot be mixed with clay. But this is where we are, fusing together, a blend of iron and clay. It is almost at the end of the image, judging by the representation of the metal of the image. It is the weakest point of the rule of man. We're at the feet mixed with iron and clay. O king, watch and behold, a great image, splendor was excellent, stood before you. It was awesome to look at. This image, head was fine gold, the chest, arm of silver, the belly of thighs and of brass, the legs of iron, and the feet partly mixed with iron and clay. You watch, Nebuchadnezzar, until a stone was cut out of the mountain without hands. This is where we are. Almost time for the Lord to come. I can hear the people say, go quickly out in the street and lane, for it must be the breaking of the day. And it started to roll and roll and roll down the mountain. until it came and struck the image on its feet, and the iron and clay, and broke them in pieces. The political system of man will be destroyed. Things will not continue perpetually. This will come to an end. Judgment is coming. If you believe the Bible like I believe the Bible, you believe in death like I believe in death. Inevitably, you can't reverse it. It's appointed a man wants to die. After death, then comes judgment. If you believe that there is a heaven and a hell, immaterial, because when you die, you die. But what if you die and get there, you find out that there is a heaven and a hell? What you're going to do? Or after death, there's no repentance. Then comes the judgment. This will continue until the stone smote the image and destroy it. Where the God of heaven shall set up his kingdom, which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all the kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. The stone kingdom, the messianic kingdom. The stage is set. We're almost there. God bless you. We see you next time.